all, I would like to thank you for inviting me. For former teachers, one of the greatest pleasures in our lives are seeing former students and talking to you. So thank you so much for inviting me. I was asked to share a few thoughts about things that I remember, and I looked at 1974 and I thought, that class, they were freshmen at Hartley in the 70-71 school year. Well, you weren't the only freshman. I was a freshman teacher that year. That was the first year I taught. So you were the second class that I had. But the difference is, it took you 4 years to graduate. It took me 43 years. Now, during that time, 13 years I taught biology and biological science electives. And then I went back and got my master's, and I actually worked as a school counselor longer than I taught. I was a school counselor at Hartley for 30 years. I retired at the end of the 2013-14 school year, but I still go back and I sub. In fact, they've got me on the calendar for October 16th. And I'm glad that so many of you were able to tour the school because it looks wonderful. The students are marvelous. One day I was subbing in A-Wing for a Latin class, and Barb Ritchie Casson, who's a good friend of mine, was in D-Wing. And she said, Miriam, when you have lunch, why don't you come over and we'll eat together, because we both had B lunch. So I went over, the bell rang, and I just finished, and I thought, oh, I don't know if I have enough time to go from C-Wing to A-Wing through the path. And I looked and I thought, oh no, they've locked the door. So I had to go around the building. So it took me a while to get there. And when I was coming down the hall, there was a boy standing in the hall outside the door where I was going, and he goes, where have you been? And I walked in the room and they go, we were worried about you. And I said, I'm fine, but I didn't want to go on the path because I would have had to knock at the window to ask you to let me in. And they go, oh, well, we would have let you in. And I said, that's the point. You're not supposed to let me in. Okay? But the kids are still wonderful. Now, I mentioned subbing. Whenever I take attendance, I look through the list of students looking for familiar names. And I subbed one time this year, and I looked through the names, and I saw the Berger name. In fact, I was subbing that day for Teresa Berger Moore. And that's a member of your class's daughters, David Berger. Is he here tonight? No? But I said to the class, I was your teacher's counselor at Hartley, and I taught her father. So I think that gave them an idea that I was pretty old, but they were still great. Okay, some things you may remember from sophomore biology. Do you remember my overhead projector and my stool? Okay, and I can remember the first lab table to the left in one class was Annie Lang and Mike Gilliland. And I'm very proud because both of them went into a science-related field. But they were in my sophomore biology class. Do you remember the old data books? Yes. Okay. Bound composition books that you put your notes in the handouts that I gave you. How about the frog dissections in May? Okay, the biology department, we would order frogs to come in live, and then we had to use a probe to destroy the nervous system. Well, these two guys were in your class, but Turk Reitelbach, whom you may remember, he was maybe a year behind you, or a year ahead of you, I can't remember. And Mark Sawicki, I gave each of the lab groups their frog, and I showed them, I said, make this first incision. They made the incision, and the frog jumped out of the pan onto the floor, and they go, Miss Rees, you did that on purpose. I said, no, I didn't, guys. So they gave it to me, and I fixed it so that they could dissect it. And is David Profura here tonight? Oh, he couldn't make it. But David asked me before the dissection, can I bring in my own frog? He said, I'm going to go out and look for one in the creek by my house. And I thought, I don't know that I should let him do it, but I'll say yes. He brought in a big bullfrog. And I piffed it for him, though it was hard to do, but I finally got it. And it made for a wonderful dissection for his class. But that's something I remember. I also remember the alcohol lamps. We only had one gas burner, and it was in the front of the room. But when we were doing micro, you had to sterilize your inoculating loops. And in one class, I put the alcohol lamp on top of the overhead projector and lit it, and I was demonstrating what you were supposed to do, and the overhead projector got on fire because of the alcohol lamp, and I can remember saying, boom, boom, because he was my go-to helper, and he put it out for me. And then I saw John Scrobot, and John, do you remember you and Rick Boone? One weekend, I drove you up to my parents' home in Youngstown, and we went to St. Elizabeth's Hospital. I used to work there in the summer in micro, and Dr. Canazzi wanted to sell an old incubator. And I said, how much do you want for it? He goes, how much can you pay for it? I said, how about $25? And those fellas helped me cart that thing back to Hartley, and we used it for years. So that's something that I remember too. Okay, what else did I want to tell you? Oh, back in the early 70s when I was teaching, when you were at Hartley, no computer for the teacher, no laptop for the students, no whiteboards, no smart boards. Instead, I used a typewriter, and I took my master's into the library, and I used the mimeograph machine. I used a blackboard, chalk, and erasers. You don't see those in schools today, but that's what we did, didn't we, Dick? Yeah. Students didn't have IEPs, individual educational plans. We didn't talk about ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities, but you had a group of students in front of you. And I remember going to a convention my first year of teaching, and there was a professor from Xavier University. He gave me the best advice as a young teacher. And he said, don't complain about any student in your classroom. They're there, and your objective is to teach them, irregardless of how good a student they are or not. And that got me through. I thought that was good advice, and it really worked. Because I know back then I had children that had disabilities, but we had to make the best of it. And we did back then. If you remember, when you were 11th and 12th graders, I taught not only biology, but I taught horticulture. At the end of your sophomore year, Father White called me into the office. And he said, Miss Rees, yeah, I could get in trouble sometimes too. And he said, when you come back in September, you're going to teach biology, but you're going to teach horticulture too, because Mr. Feldmeyer is leaving. And I said, Father, I was a zoology major. I never had a botany class in my life. And he said, Miss Rees, as I was saying earlier, when you come back in September, you're going to teach horticulture. Well, I was only a chapter ahead of the students, sometimes not even that far ahead. But by the grace of God and the advice of the Killalay family and some other gardeners in town, we did pretty well. We had 3 plant sales every year. Some of you took the horticulture class. We would get 500 cuttings in the fall, and we raised those poinsettias and sold them at Christmas time. Then for Easter, we sold lilies and mums, and here again, we'd get them in either in the bulk form or small cuttings and raise them to maturity. And then in the spring, we sold over 25,000 flowering annuals and vegetables. So really, it was the cooperation of the students and my determination that got us through that. But it was an enjoyable time for me. But here again, I'd like to thank you for inviting me, and hopefully I mentioned something that came to mind from your experience.